Hej och välkomna till Ntd Nyheter. Jag heter Dan Alfjorden. Här är våra rubriker. Trump planerar att öka tullavgifterna för Kina till minst 60% om han blir vald. Biden skaffar TikTok trots säkerhetsproblem. Ryssland förbereder sig för militär sammandrabbning med väst, säger chefen för Estlands underrättelsetjänst. FN-chef säger att Hamas inte är en terroristgrupp. Ntd's specialserie om kommunismen fortsätter, denna gång om revolution på export till Östeuropa. Ett djärvt uttalande från den tidigare presidenten Trump skedde i en intervju med Fox News den 4 februari, då han lovade att han skulle införa en över 60% tullavgift på kinesiska varor om han vinner en andra mandatperiod.
Now the Washington Post is saying that you're talking about 60% tariffs on Chinese goods. Is that in the cards?
No, I would say maybe it's going to be more than that because we're going to have, look, I want China to do great. I do. And I like President Xi a lot. He was a very good friend of mine during my term.
Well, look, COVID cover-up, intellectual property
when
theft.
COVID came,
the list is long from our number one adversary, so I don't know if he's a friend.
No, but I got along with him great. I'm not sure he loved what I was doing because I was, getting along with him.
I don't think he wants you in the White House, Mr. President.
No, he doesn't. The market almost crashed when I won Iowa. And New Hampshire, the market went down tremendously.
Trump är republikanernas favorit. Om planen går igenom kan det få stora konsekvenser för de globala ekonomierna. Trump införde tullavgifter på kinesiska importvaror till ett värde av hundratals miljarder dollar under 2018. Senare höjde han tullavgiften till 25%. Vid den tidpunkten importerade USA mer från Kina än vad landet sålde. Handelsunderskottet mellan länderna uppgick till över 400 miljarder dollar till Kinas fördel.
Look, it's not sustainable for this country to lose $500 billion a year.
Trump använde tullar för att pressa Kina att köpa mer amerikanska varor. Det slutade med att de två länderna undertecknade ett handelsavtal. Enligt detta avtal gick Peking med på att köpa amerikanska varor för över 200 miljarder dollar. Trump har också antytt att han skulle införa en 10% tullavgift på nästan all import. Bortsett från tullavgifter fick den tidigare presidenten också frågan om han tror att Kina kommer att blanda sig i det amerikanska valet i år.
I think they will, and they won't be interfering on my behalf. We should go same day voting, paper ballots, voter ID, and no mail-in ballots.
Would you try to stop China from taking over Taiwan? What would you do if they went to Taiwan?
I won't tell you now because that would really jeopardize my negotiating ability with China. So I don't talk about those things.
President Biden finns nu på TikTok. Den 11 februari hade kontot redan över 60 000 följare och över 500 000 likes. Hans första video har fått nästan 5 000 kommentarer. Här är mer. President Biden har skaffat TikTok och användarnamnet är Biden HQ. Hans profilbild är ett svartvitt foto av honom själv med röda laserögon. Och profilbeskrivningen är "får ekonomin att växa". Beskrivningen på hans första inlägg är LOL, hey guys.
Chiefs or Niners?
Two great quarterbacks, hard to decide. But if I didn't say I was for the Eagles, and I'd be sleeping alone. My wife's a Philly girl.
Game or commercials?
Game.
Game or halftime show?
Game.
Jason Kelsey or Travis Kelsey?
Mama Kelsey. I understand she makes great chocolate chip cookies.
Deviously plotting to rig the season so the Chiefs would make the Super Bowl, or the Chiefs just being a good football team?
You get in trouble if I told you.
Trump or Biden?
Are you kidding? Biden.
Att Biden har TikTok är anmärkningsvärt eftersom många ser appen som ett nationellt säkerhetshot. Den ägs av ett kinesiskt företag, ByteDance, och ByteDance är ansvarigt inför det kinesiska kommunistpartiet. FBI-chefen Christopher Wray sa vid en utfrågning nyligen att TikTok medför mängder av nationella säkerhetsproblem.
It gives them the ability to control data collection on millions of users, which could be used for all sorts of intelligence operations. The recommendation algorithm, which could be used for all sorts of influence operations or to sow divisiveness, discord. It gives them the ability, should they so choose, to control the software on millions of devices.
Det nationella säkerhetsrådets talesperson, John Kirby, avböjde på måndagen upprepade gånger att kommentera dessa hot.
Trying to square why the president would use this platform that his administration is weighing a national ban on.
I just can't speak for the campaign or their decisions. I apologize.
The administration still has concerns, security concerns about TikTok, even though the campaign has now joined it.
Again, I cannot speak, nor will I speak for the campaign.
The president is sending a message to Americans about the safety of TikTok by doing that?
I'd have to refer you to the campaign.
Experter på sociala medier säger att Biden försöker rikta sig till unga människor. Pew Research säger att en tredjedel av 18 till 29-åringar får sina nyheter från TikTok.
TikTok's the best place to go if you're going to target the younger generation.
Medieexperten Ryan Dozer säger att Facebook var den mer traditionella sociala medievägen och att resa runt i landet är sannolikt fortfarande en del av Bidens kampanjstrategi. Men för unga människor är TikTok den främsta plattformen.
Based on the recent polling, what we've seen is that President Biden is losing a lot of support with younger people, particularly over the handling of the war between Hamas and Israel.
Andrew Silipak är professor i sociala medier vid University of Florida. Han säger att TikTok är förbjudet inom den federala regeringen, inom militären, i olika delstatsregeringar och till och med på olika högskolecampus.
And now we have the President of the United States effectively endorsing a platform that most of the people that work for him are technically not allowed to be on.
Vi kontaktade Vita huset för en kommentar, men fick inget svar innan sändning. En FN-chef sa den 14 februari att han inte anser att Hamas är en terroristgrupp. FNs humanitära chef Martin Griffiths talade på Sky News. Griffiths fick en fråga om huruvida Israels militära mål att utrota Hamas och förhindra terroristorganisationen från att utöva något inflytande på styret i Gaza är genomförbart.
I think it's very difficult. And as you say, I've worked with many different terrorist and insurgent groups. Hamas is not a terrorist group for us, of course, as you know. It's a political movement.
När det gäller Hamas terrorattack den 7 oktober sa Griffiths att han har full förståelse för det trauma som Israel upplevde. Men FNs humanitära chef säger att Israel fortfarande behöver bygga en relation med sina grannar. Den israeliska regeringens talesman, Alan Levi, fördömde kommentarerna. Han skrev på X: Martin Griffiths förnekar att Hamas är en terroristorganisation. Inte undra på att han efter den dödligaste terrorattacken sedan 11 september missbrukar sin makt för att rädda Hamas skinn istället för att kräva att de kapitulerar. Nu nyheter i korthet. Ryssland förbereder sig enligt uppgift för en direkt konflikt med NATO inom det närmaste decenniet. Chefen för Estlands underrättelsetjänst sa den 13 februari att Ryssland väljer en väg av långsiktig konfrontation med NATO. Han pekade på hur Ryssland planerar att fördubbla antalet styrkor som är stationerade längs landets gräns mot NATO-länder. Men den estniske tjänstemannen säger att en militär attack från Ryssland är mycket osannolik på kort sikt. Det beror på att Ryssland måste behålla trupper i Ukraina. Ett växande antal tjänstemän i väst har varnat för ett militärt hot från Ryssland. Vissa västledare vill placera NATO-styrkor längs gränsen till Ryssland för att matcha Kremls uppbyggnad. Estlands premiärminister Kaja Kallas finns med på en rysk efterlysningslista. Ett officiellt register från den 13 februari visar att hennes namn fanns med i ett ryskt register över personer som är efterlysta i samband med brottsanklagelser. Det är första gången som ministeriet har satt upp en utländsk ledare på en lista över efterlysta. Registret specificerade inte vilka anklagelser hon står inför. Kallas har visat ett starkt stöd för Ukraina. Hon gick i spetsen för ansträngningarna att öka det militära stödet till Kiev och skärpa sanktionerna mot Ryssland. Att Kallas finns med på listan över efterlysta har liten praktisk betydelse eftersom kontakterna mellan Ryssland och västvärlden har varit frysta under konflikten. En seger för europeiska jordbrukare. Den 13 februari antog EU en resolution som tillåter jordbrukare att använda viss mark som tidigare skyddats av miljöskäl. Resolutionen trädde i kraft den 14 februari. Den kommer att gälla retroaktivt från den 1 januari till årets slut. Antagandet av åtgärden kommer samtidigt som jordbrukare i hela Europa har protesterat mot EUs jordbrukspolitik. Demonstranter över hela kontinenten klagar på att tung reglering skapar en ekonomisk börda och gör deras produkter dyrare än vad de kostar om de importeras från länder utanför EU. Medlemmarna i det brittiska rockbandet Coldplay vill träffa sina fans i Kina, men den kinesiska regimen har inte gett dem något klartecken. Sångaren Chris Martin säger att trots att de inte kan få tillstånd nu lovar han fansen att bandet ska spela där en dag. Låt oss ta en närmare titt.
Coldplay har aldrig spelat på det kinesiska fastlandet eftersom sångaren Chris Martin sa att de inte får tillstånd från Peking, även om det inte finns någon officiell förklaring. Enligt rapporter är blockaden mycket sannolikt kopplad till politiska skäl, att bandets stöd för det fria tibetanska folket, pro-demokrati och andra känsliga ämnen som Taiwan kan ha triggat Peking. Ett spår från 2000 av bandet med titeln Spice lyder: Jag vaknar och ser att ingen är fri. Vi är alla på flykt. Se hur vi lever här nere. Jag kan inte sova av rädsla. Kina förbjöd låten på grund av uppviglande politiskt innehåll trots att den inte nämner någon specifik region. Sångaren Martin avfärdade de dåliga nyheterna med ett skämt. Sjung sången, säger Free Tibet när låten spelas baklänges. Värt att notera är att den kinesiska kommunistregimen med våld tog kontroll över Tibet på 1950-talet. Tibets andliga och politiska ledare Dalai Lama tvingades fly från regionen för att undvika förföljelse. Coldplay är inte ensamma om att bli utestängda från Kina. Lady Gaga tog en gång en bild med Dalai Lama. Hon har varit på Pekings svarta lista sedan dess. Katy Perry blev bannlyst efter att ha viftat med en taiwanesisk flagga 2015. Och Maroon 5 tvingades ställa in sina spelningar i Peking och Shanghai 2015 efter att en medlem önskat Dalai Lama grattis på födelsedagen på sociala medier. Samma år inträffade samma tragedi för Bon Jovi som också blockerades från Kina. Många sa att det berodde på en scen i deras musikvideo We Weren't Born to Follow som belyste de prodemokratiska protesterna på Himmelska fridens torg 1989.
Och vi är strax tillbaka.
Den högsta konsten är vacker, tidlös, inspirerad av det gudomliga. Upplev Shenyun. Biljetter på shenyun.com.
Kinesiska kommunistpartiet exporterade inte bara revolution till Afrika och Latinamerika utan ägnade också stor möda åt att försöka få inflytande i Albanien. Redan när Chrusjtjov höll sitt hemliga tal som markerade inledningen av avstaliniseringen var Albanien på samma ideologiska linje som kinesiska kommunistpartiet. Mao var väldigt nöjd och inledde biståndsprogrammet till Albanien oavsett vad det kostade. Vi kommer nu att visa den andra delen av revolution på export i specialserien Hur kommunismens spöke styr världen. Filmen är baserad på boken How the Spectre of Communism is Ruling Our World.
Three. Exporting revolution to Eastern Europe. A. Albania. The CCP not only exported revolutions to Africa and Latin America, but also spent a great deal of effort to gain influence over Albania, another communist country. As early as when Nikita Khrushchev gave his secret speech marking the era of de-Stalinization, Albania was ideologically aligned with the CCP. Mao was greatly pleased, and he began the program of giving aid to Albania, regardless of the cost. Xinhua news agency reporter Wang Hongqi wrote, quote, from 1954 to 1978, China provided financial aid to the Party of Labor of Albania 75 times. The sum in the agreement was more than 10 billion Chinese yuan. At the time, the population of Albania was only around 2 million, which meant each person received the equivalent of 4,000 Chinese yuan. On the other hand, the average annual income of a Chinese person at the time was no more than 200 yuan. Within this period, China was also experiencing the Great Leap Forward and the resulting famine, as well as the economic collapse caused by Mao's Cultural Revolution. During the Great Famine, China used its extremely scarce hard currency foreign reserves to import food supplies. In 1962, Rez Milli, the Albanian ambassador to China, demanded aid in food supplies. Under the command of Party Vice Chairman Liu, the Chinese ship carrying wheat purchased from Canada and due for China changed course and unloaded the wheat at an Albanian port. Meanwhile, Albania took the CCP's aid for granted and wasted it. The enormous amount of steel, machine equipment, and precision instruments sent from China were left exposed to the elements. Albanian officials were dismissive. Quote, it's of little importance. If it breaks or disappears, China will simply give us more. China helped Albania construct a textile factory, but Albania did not have cotton, so China had to use its foreign reserves to buy cotton for Albania. On one occasion, the vice president of Albania, Adil Karkani, asked Di Biao, the Chinese ambassador in Albania at the time, to replace major equipment at a fertilizer factory and demanded that the equipment be from Italy. China then bought machines from Italy and installed them for Albania. Such so-called aid only instills greed and laziness in the recipient. In October 1974, Albania demanded a loan of 5 billion yuan from China. At the time, it was late in the Cultural Revolution and China's economy had collapsed almost completely. In the end, China still decided to lend 1 billion yuan. However, Albania was greatly unsatisfied and started an anti-Chinese movement in its country with slogans like, quote, "We shall never bow our heads in the face of economic pressure from a foreign country." It also declined to support China with petroleum and asphalt. B. Soviet repression in Eastern Europe. The socialist system in Eastern Europe was entirely a product of the Soviet Union. After World War II, according to the division of power laid down at the Yalta Conference, Eastern Europe was handed over to the Soviet Union. In 1956, after Khrushchev's secret speech, Poland was the first country where protests broke out. After protests by factory workers, a crackdown, and apologies from the government, Poland elected Władysław Gomulka, who was hawkish on the Soviet Union and willing to stand up to Khrushchev. An attempted revolution in Hungary then took place in October 1956. A group of students gathered and toppled the bronze statue of Stalin in Budapest. Soon after, many joined the protest and clashed with police. Police opened fire and at least 100 protesters were killed. The Soviet Union initially wished to cooperate with the newly established opposition party and named János Kádár as the first secretary of the Party Central Committee and Imre Nagy as the chairman of the Council of Ministers and Prime Minister. After Nagy came to power, he withdrew from the Warsaw Pact, a Soviet-led defense treaty, and further pushed for liberalization. The Soviet Union was unwilling to tolerate this, so they invaded, arrested Nagy, and executed him. The Hungarian incident was followed by Czechoslovakia's Prague Spring in 1968. After the secret report by Khrushchev, regulations in Czechoslovakia began to loosen up. For several subsequent years, a relatively independent civil society was being formed. One of the representative figures was Václav Havel, who later became the president of what became the Czech Republic in 1993. With this social backdrop, on January 5, 1968, the reformist Alexander Dubček took over as Prime Minister of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia. He strengthened reforms and promoted the slogan of humane socialism. Soon afterward, Dubček began rehabilitating, on a large scale, individuals who had been wrongly persecuted during the Stalin period. Dissidents were released, control over the media was loosened, academic freedom was encouraged, citizens could travel abroad freely, surveillance over religions was reduced, limited intra-party democracy was allowed, and so on. The Soviet Union considered such reforms a betrayal of the principle of socialism and feared that other countries would follow. From March to August 1968, the leaders of the Soviet Union, including Leonid Brezhnev, held 5 conferences with Dubček, trying to pressure him into abandoning democratic reforms. Dubček rejected the appeals. As a result, in August 1968, more than 6,300 Soviet tanks invaded Czechoslovakia. The Prague Spring, which had begun 8 months prior, was crushed. Judging from the Hungary incident and the end of the Prague Spring, we can see that socialism in Eastern Europe was forced upon the people there and violently maintained by the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union let up slightly, socialism in Eastern Europe began falling away immediately. The classic example is the fall of the Berlin Wall. On October 6, 1989, multiple cities in eastern Germany were holding massive protests and marches, clashing with police. At the time, Mikhail Gorbachev was visiting Berlin. He told the General Secretary of the Socialist Unity Party of Germany, Erich Honecker, that reform was the only way forward. Immediately afterward, East Germany lifted travel restrictions to Hungary and Czechoslovakia. This allowed vast numbers of people to defect to Western Germany through Czechoslovakia, and the Berlin Wall could no longer stop the waves of fleeing citizens. On November 9, the East gave up on the partition. Tens of thousands of residents poured into West Berlin, and the wall was dismantled. The symbol of a communist Iron Curtain that had stood for decades disappeared into history. The year 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell, was full of turmoil. Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, and Eastern Germany all achieved liberty, freeing themselves of socialist rule. This was also the result of the Soviet Union giving up on its own policies of interference. In 1991, the Soviet Union fell, marking the end of the Cold War. Four, the end of the Cold War. The end of the Cold War was a great relief for many. They thought that socialism, communism, and similar tyrannies had finally come to an end. But this was simply another way for communism to win. The standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union diverted people's attention away from the Chinese Communist Party and gave it time to carry out more malicious and sneaky schemes. The Tiananmen Massacre on June 4, 1989, marked the rise of party leader Jiang Zemin. Aided by the party's suppression and propaganda machine that had already matured, Jiang continued to systematically destroy traditional culture and manufacture party culture. By destroying morals, Jiang cultivated a society of wolf cubs, youth who were anti-tradition and anti-morality, which made way for the large-scale persecution of Falun Gong and eventually destruction of humankind. Although communists have fallen from power in the former communist countries, communism has never been tried for the crimes it committed on a global level. Russia, similarly, has never purged the Soviet influence or abolished the secret police apparatus. The former head of the KGB is now in charge of the country. Communist ideologies and their followers not only still exist, but are spreading their influence to the West and around the world. The anti-communist activists in the West, the older generations who have a deeper understanding of communism, are gradually dying out, while members of the newer generations lack a sufficient understanding of, and the will to understand, communism's evil, murderous, and deceptive nature. Consequently, communists have been able to continue their radical or progressive movements to destroy the existing ideologies and social structures and even seize power through violence. A. Red Square is still red. As other former communist countries called for independence in succession, people in the Soviet Union also yearned for change. Politics fell into chaos, the economy collapsed, and Russia was isolated in foreign affairs. Then Russian President Boris Yeltsin declared that the Soviet Communist Party was illegal and restricted its activities. People were energetic in expressing their long-held contempt for the party, and on December 26, 1991, the Supreme Soviet passed a law to dissolve the Soviet Union, marking the end of its 69-year rule. But how could deeply rooted communist ideologies yield so easily? Yeltsin set off a decommunization campaign upon establishing the Russian Federation. Statues of Lenin were pulled down, Soviet books were burned, former Soviet government employees were laid off, and many Soviet-related objects were smashed or burned. But all this still didn't get to the essence of communism. The denazification movement after World War II was much more thorough, from the public trials of Nazi war criminals to the cleansing of fascist ideology. The very word Nazi is now tied to a sense of shame. Even today, the hunt for former Nazis continues in order to bring them to justice. Unfortunately for Russia, where communist forces were still strong, the absence of a thorough purge of communism left room for them to make a comeback. In October 1993, only 2 years after the citizens of Moscow had taken to the streets to demand their independence and democracy, tens of thousands of Moscow citizens marched on the city square, shouting the names of Lenin and Stalin and waving the former Soviet flags. The rally in 1993 was of communists asking for the reinstatement of the Soviet system. The presence of troops and police only intensified the confrontation. At the critical moment, the security services and military officials chose to support Yeltsin, who then dispatched military tanks to quiet down the crisis. Yet communist forces still remained and established the Russian Communist Party, which became the largest political party in the country until it was replaced by the current ruling party, Vladimir Putin's United Russia. In recent years, in some surveys, such as those conducted by Moscow's RBK-TV from 2015 to 2016, many respondents, about 60%, have said that the Soviet Union should be reborn. In May 2017, many Russians commemorated the 100th anniversary of the Soviet Union's rise to power. The Soviet Communist Youth League, Komsomol, which was established during the Soviet Union, held an oath-swearing ceremony for youths joining them in Moscow's Red Square before Lenin's tomb. At the rally, the chairman of Russia's Communist Party, Gennady Zyuganov, claimed the 60,000 new recruits had joined the party recently and that the Communist Party continued to survive and expand. In Moscow alone, there are almost 80 monuments to Lenin, whose body, entombed in Red Square, continues to attract tourists and followers. Red Square is still red. The KGB has never been thoroughly exposed and condemned by the world. Communism is still present in Russia, and believers of communism still abound. B. The Red Calamity continues. There are currently 4 countries ruled by self-declared communist regimes: China, Vietnam, Cuba, and Laos. Although North Korea has abandoned Marxist-Leninist communism on the surface, in actuality, it is still a communist totalitarian state. Before the Cold War, there were 27 communist countries. Now, there are 13 countries where communist parties are allowed to participate in politics, while there are currently about 120 countries that have registered communist parties. But over the past century, communist influence in government has faded away in most countries. However, the majority of these countries still came under variants of socialism. Rather than calling themselves communist, the political parties took on names like the Democratic Socialist Party, the People's Socialist Party, and the like. Of the 33 independent countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, the majority have communist parties that are accepted as legitimate political players. In Venezuela, Chile, Uruguay, and elsewhere, the Communist Party and the ruling party often form coalition governments, while communist parties in other countries play the role of opposition. In the West, and in some countries in other regions, communism did not resort to violent methods as was done in the East, but through subversion, it has subtly infiltrated society and achieved its goals of destroying people's moral values, destroying the culture God has imparted to them, and spreading communist and socialist ideologies. The specter has, in fact, gained control over the entire world. Achieving the ultimate goal of destroying humankind is only a step away.
Detta var den andra delen av del 6 i vår specialserie Hur kommunismens spöke styr världen. Hela delen samt andra avsnitt finns på Ntd Sveriges kanaler på YouTube, Facebook och Ganjing World. Tack för att ni har tittat och på återseende!